Hi everybody, Ed Underwood here from the Cinemagicians, that's right. And normally I would be talking to you about how magicians helped create the wonderful world of cinema we enjoy today by turning magic tricks into the foundation of special effects. But today we're going to talk about television and history. Yay! You know, if you've been following American show business at all lately, you know one of the great sensational stories of recent years is the abrupt canceling of Stephen Colbert's Late Show on CBS/Paramount and the controversy that goes with that. There was a merger involved, and even though Mr. Colbert has had the highest rated program of that type for 9 years in a row, the show was canceled in the midst of a business deal. Part of that business deal involved a settlement of a case, and this particular case was involved with a certain political person. Now listen, I don't want to be petty and name names, but this individual, when he would watch Mr. Colbert's show, sometimes his face would grow orange with rage, and the walls of his castle, well, they ran with ketchup. It's true. So, we've seen this kind of thing in the past, you know. Yeah, it's fairly familiar. It's a situation that reminded me of a great story. A story about a king and a jester. Yes, you see, in days past, the jester had an important role to play sociologically. He did tell stories and jokes somewhat at the king's expense, and it was considered to be a great service to the kingdom because it showed the king was able to hear these little cutting remarks sometimes, these stories, these jokes or songs, and he could take a little kidding, and it made him seem more down to earth and, in the end, more kingly. Well, at one point, and this is a true story, there was a jester who knew that the queen had been, well, a little fast and loose with other members of the royal court. Let's just say she had a naughty night or two. She had a couple of nights in white satin. She had a couple of wild nights. Knowing that this was the situation, and frankly everyone in the kingdom knew it, the king hadn't admitted it, because the royal dalliance files had never really officially been released. Everyone knew it, so the king is walking by and the jester gives him a smack up the backside, followed by a nice goosey pinch. Well, this one time the king seemed to have lost his great sense of humor. He turned around, looked at the jester, and said, "What is the meaning of this?" And the jester said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were the queen." Well, on this occasion, it turns out the king truly was in a bad way, because he had his guards come to punish the jester for his comedy. They forced him to kneel before the king. They pushed him down to the ground. And if that wasn't enough, then his guards began to work the jester over. They pelted him with questions. They twisted him and turned him. They beat him. They forced him into all kinds of strange situations. And they abused him on behalf of the angry king. When the man was nearly beaten half to death, he said, "Let him be put to death." They whacked him on the head, and then they folded him, creased him, bent him, and the king said, "Let him be buried face down, that he will never see the sunshine, and let that be a lesson to all of you who live under my rule, under my thumb. You cannot mock me and have no price to pay for it." But something amazing happened. When they looked back at the jester, instead of being inside out, he had somehow managed to turn himself outside in. That's right. He was face up. He was back to normal. This amazed the people, and they rejoiced because they loved the jester, and they thought it was great because it meant the jester had gotten one last joke in on the king, even in death. And that outraged the king so much he told his guards to tear up the jester's body, rip him into pieces. He was dissected. He was trisected. He was intersected and destroyed in every possible way. His pieces were shown to the kingdom and made a mockery of. Finally, they folded him up, and they said his great punishment will be to be smashed into a little box and buried in an unmarked grave. But at that point, the guards looked and said, "Do you see what I see?" It looked as if the jester was no longer asunder. In fact, he was whole again. It was a miracle. And the people loved the jester. And the people loved the jester. And they remembered his jokes and stories, and they told them. And so the spirit of the jester very much lived on. And so let this be a lesson to presidents and tin pot dictators, whoever they may be. If you use your power to silence a critic, in the end, I assure you, you will have only created 100 more.